All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me for my seminar today. One of the things I wanted to talk about today, because I figured it'd be a good topic, we've covered it a lot in our live streams that we do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern, is talking about maximizing rod, reel, and line choices. There's a lot of really good vendors here. They're fishing both rods, reels, and line. And what you will see, if anybody watches a lot of tournaments, there's a lot of guys that have a lot of combos. As nice as it is, and as helpful as it is absolutely not necessary. And that's what I want to talk about. How can you make your choices on a rod and reel and line combo that is more suitable than just for one technique? You go find a rod and reel combo out there that'll do everything, and it'll do one thing exceptionally well. But that doesn't mean it can't be used for other techniques as well. You can get something set up that will at least be sufficient for multiple techniques. That's what I wanted to cover today. First and foremost, if anybody is not familiar with rod power and action, I figured let's start there and break down what that difference is. On the surface, it looks like the same thing, but it's not. If we cover action first, action is essentially at what point does the rod deflect when you first start applying a weight to it, a load to it. You're going to set the hook. You will see from the tip down to a certain point a clear deflection point where you will still see a little bit of a radius in the rod, but it becomes dramatically less from a very defined point. That's your action. With the faster action, you're going to have line take up or hook set capability a lot sooner than you would something with slow. That matters depending upon what technique you like to do. Something where you're doing, we'll say spinner baits, right? Tends to be a bigger hook, a thicker gauge hook. You want something that's faster, extra fast, because you want to be able to take up that line, apply tension, hold tension, and make sure there's enough power to drive that hook point home. Because again, you're dealing with a lot more metal, to put it as simply as I can. If you're more on the moderate or slow side, that's when you're dealing with, we'll say, finesse techniques. If you're dealing with really thin gauge hooks, especially best example I can put would be something like a jerkbait. You know, a lot of jerkbaits tend to have a lot of really small treble hooks, and it doesn't take much to set those home to really get a good hook set on them. So you don't want a rod that's gonna be like a fast or extra fast action that's gonna bend quick, because at that point when you're leaning into it, you're more likely to tear those teeny tiny little hooks out than you are to set them home and just, you know, get them where they need to be. That's action in a nutshell. Power, this is a little bit harder to explain, but it is essentially an extension of that. But now you're talking about how much further down the rod does it continue to deflect, and what is the maximum weight that it can withstand while still doing what you hope to do. It should be a lot more elaborate than that, but for the sake of being brief on this and concise, that's it in a nutshell, power and action. Why does all that matter? Again, it comes back to techniques. What is it that you want to do? If you were just getting fishing and you wanted one or two rods to really get you started that would cover multiple techniques, you need to find something that's going to be still powerful enough that can handle some of these bigger applications, where you throw in, say, a smaller softbody swim bait, spinner bait, bladed jig, swim jig, jig. Like, these are all kind of heavier hook type applications where you're going to need a little bit of power to set it home. But then when you're dealing with things like, say, Texas rig soft plastics for open water, whether it's a weightless Texas rig fluke or a Senko, and you need something a little bit more supple because these tend to be a lot lighter, so you need to have something that can launch a light plastic, or you want to fish crankbaits on it, and, you know, now you're kind of back on that other end of the power spectrum. You have to find something that fits in the middle of that. How do you do that? It's tough. Every rod company is going to make something a little bit different, but there is a band where they all pretty much align simultaneously doing the same thing. So for a rod suggestion, if you're looking for something that's jack of all trades, master of none, this is where I'm going to have you land in there. If you're talking about spinning rod, you want something that's going to cover a lot of finesse techniques, then that'd be like a 6'10", to a 7-foot, medium extra fast. If you want something that's more akin to a lot more moderate techniques, you know you're not going to throw something like a Ned rig. You're not going to throw a drop shot. You're going to be doing, 3/8 to maybe half-ounce jigs. You're going to be doing some good Texas rig fishing. maybe heavy Senko around thicker vegetation. Get into a 7'2", I realized I forgot everything else, medium, heavy, fast. You know, something like that, especially if you find a rod that is rated to a medium heavy. You go pick up 3 different medium, heavy, fast, 7'2", medium, heavy, fast from 3 different rod companies, and they're all gonna be different. There's just enough variability that, you know, one might feel like a true 7'2" medium heavy, then you get the other one, and it's like, that's a little bit stiffer. I probably can't get away with something light for that. And then you go to the other end, it's like, okay, that's like a wet noodle. There's no backbone to this whatsoever. If I throw a jig on that, I don't feel confident I'm gonna get a good hook set. You have to play around a little bit, but for the most part, you get yourself a 7'2" medium, heavy, fast. That's gonna cover everything for you except for really, really finesse things. If you're trying to find something in a spinning rod that's gonna do really well for both finesse and moderate techniques, good luck. That's where it gets really, really tough, because at some point you're gonna find a balance where it's not supple enough to handle really light line, light duty techniques, but also not heavy enough to do some of these moderate techniques. If you're talking about a casting rod, it actually gets a little bit easier in my opinion. But for lighter techniques, 7-foot medium fast, it's gonna be a moderate amount of power with a little bit better than moderate action on it. So your hook set penetration is gonna be good, but it's not gonna be so powerful and so stiff that you couldn't throw something really light. In theory, if you really wanted to, you could throw a drop shot on something like that, or a, we'll say 1/8 or heavier ounce Ned rig, which is still pretty light. You might be a little challenged in that, but you could probably still get it done. But that same rod will still handle any jerk bait you want to throw on it, crankbait, like really any of your treble hook applications for a standard size crankbait, jerk bait, anything you want to go along that way, lipless crankbait even. If you're more on the heavier side, you know you want to get in the slop. You like fishing timber, you like fishing a lot of thicker vegetation, whatever it be for you. Again, I'm coming back to that 7'2", medium heavy extra fast, or medium heavy fast. Something's got a little bit more backbone. It's rated more in that either 1/4 ounce to 3/4 ounce lure weight range, or maybe a 3/8 ounce up to a 1 ounce lure weight range. You've got backbone, but if you come down to say like a fast versus an extra fast, you're gonna have more control when you come back on the lighter side of your application for that. If you want to throw a 5-inch weightless Texas rig Senko, extra fast might be a little much. Fast with a medium heavy, especially if it's on the stiffer side, like a stout medium heavy, that's where you can kind of find that balance on that. But you still got enough backbone. If you're throwing a big jig, you're throwing a spinnerbait, bladed jig, what have you, you can still do all of that with that. It is difficult to try and find something that is suitable for 5-6 techniques. You know, at that point, you're really asking a lot for your rod. But if you're looking for something that can do 3 or 4 techniques, again, sufficiently, might not be the greatest thing for it, but it'll work, then this will land you inside that range. And I know that because I lived this way for many, many years as I was trying to learn. You know, I knew of a technique. I want to learn swim jigs. Great, I gotta go buy a new rod. Nope, it's not that much different from a football jig to be dragging on the bottom. It's the same weight, it's the same style hook, it's the same gauge weight, material, gauge on the hook itself. It's not that different, so I know I can make that work. Okay, well what else do I want to learn that is still somewhere within that range? And you can toe the line on that a little bit. It's obviously a lot easier to toe the line with something that's on the lighter side of the range than the heavier side. And I've got a bucket full of broken rods to prove that point. So don't test it too much on the high side, test it on the light side. Well, that's rods in 101, I would say. Talking about reels, I feel like this is a lot more straightforward. When you're talking about reels, there's only 2 things you have to worry about. The reel size, which is really going to control your line capacity, and your gear ratio. So how many inches of line are you actually retrieving per full revolution of the reel handle? That's it. It's very straightforward. So if you want to get something that can literally do anything you want, a 150 with a 6.3 to 1 will cover all your bases. There's a reason for that. It's a heck of a lot easier to go fast when you want to go uncontrollably fast using a slow gear ratio reel than it is to try and go at a very slow controlled pace with a high speed gear ratio reel. It's much, much harder to slow it down and know and feel confident you're slowing down than it is to just speed up and reeling like a madman. So if you want one reel that can do absolutely everything, a 6.3 to 1, about a 150 size will cover all your bases. That's going to hold almost a full standard size spool of line that you would get from, we'll say, 10 to 14 pound test. It'll last you almost the whole season if you're out there as kind of a casual angler, maybe once every 1 to 2 weeks. Someone like myself, where I fish every weekend without fail, if I'm lucky, I get out even on Fridays or Saturdays, I'll reline that reel 2 or 3 times a year. But if you're just looking for something that will get you almost the whole season, that'll cover your bases. If you're looking, now, yeah, okay, we'll go this way. To expand on that, there's multiple different sizes when you get into the spinning realm, and companies advertise it differently. It could be a 30, a 300, or a 3000. It is, we'll call it, there's a 1, 2, 3, and 4 size. The number of zeros after are kind of irrelevant. It just seems to matter from company to company depending upon how they want to advertise it. When it comes to spinning, reel size, it starts to matter depending upon which side of the application you're going on. If you're going for really light techniques, finesse presentations, I found that a slightly bigger than average reel size is more beneficial because the line comes off the spool a little bit more easily. So especially when you're dealing with something really, really light, guys that like to throw Ned rigs. I know a really common weight head is a 1/10 ounce or even a 1/20 ounce. With that, with a little 3-inch TRD on the back, there's not a lot of weight behind that. You don't have a lot of momentum to pull that out. So I found going from a 2000 to a 3000 series size reel, my casting distance went up dramatically. I changed nothing else other than that reel. And I just found that the line was spooling off of it a lot more easily. If you're not worried about that, with the really, really light duty stuff, 2000, 3000, 200, 300, whatever you want to call it, either one you'll be happy with. I would prefer to go as light and small as possible in all of my traditional fishing applications as possible. So I'm going to always opt for the 200 size, just because I don't need a ton of line capacity. There's the other half of Reel Nothern Bass, by the way. That's Andrew. He's busy with bass fishing electronics the whole weekend. Now we're talking casting reels. Same principle applies, although unless you're getting into like, you want to get into really, really finesse things, now you're getting into like BFS gear, we're not going to cover that because nobody that this is really geared toward is going to go into that realm. So I'm going to keep it very straightforward. If you're getting a casting reel, a 150 to a 200 size is really all you need. It's an average size. You know, it's not overkill. A 200, I would say, is a little bit bigger than average. It's not absolutely necessary. If you're, let's say you're a die-hard spinnerbait guy and you want to get into like a really nice new spinning reel, for that I would say, yeah, you probably want to go to a 200 size. Because I know most people, and especially myself, if you're fishing a spinnerbait, you're typically throwing heavier line. You're probably throwing 18-pound fluorocarbon or something heavier. It's a bigger diameter. A 200 size is going to benefit you more because you can fit a lot more line on that. You're getting a lot more cast. And if you're like me and you're like throwing it along heavy structure, a lot of rocks, you're retying often. So having that extra line that you're not re-spooling all the time is always helpful too. If you're going heavier techniques, like say again, you want to do spinnerbaits, you want to do swim jigs, swim baits, now you're talking the 2 to 250 or even 300 size. If you're really going for like die-hard swim bait anglers, you're probably going into the 300 reel size because you need better components inside of that to deal with the wear and tear and stress that you're going to find throwing a 4+ ounce swim bait. If that's not your game, don't worry about that. Stick with the 2 to 250 size. If you like throwing more moving baits on a regular basis, that'll cover everything. Now when talking about line, there's 3 main types, although most people only fish 2. I will mention monofilament because everybody that I know of that got started with somebody that didn't really know a lot about bass fishing got started with monofilament. It is the most common line. It's cheap. You can find it anywhere. There's pros and cons to all 3 of these. Monofilament gets the nod again because that's pretty much everybody's starting point. It's good enough line for what it is. There are downsides to it though. It's got very high stretch. I don't remember what the percentage is, but I want to say it's about 30 to 40% stretch. So in this case, monofilament, is going to hurt you in single hook point applications like a jig. You're going to need a really stout rod and one heck of a hook set to make sure you're setting that hook point home and getting that fish in. Otherwise, it's going to cost you. It does float, which is good if you want a cheap top water application. Monofilament's great for that. It tends to float, and it has still really good abrasion resistance. Not as good as fluorocarbon, but it's still pretty good. That's the pros and cons of monofilament. Braid is kind of another, I wouldn't say niche, but almost niche kind of line in that it does a lot of things really good, but where it's not good, it's abysmal. Benefits of braid: near zero stretch. There's near zero line memory. It floats, so it works phenomenal for top water as well. It has longevity to it because it doesn't have that line memory. I've had some braid on 2 of my spinning reels that I haven't replaced in 3 years because I do braid to a fluorocarbon leader, and I'm constantly retying the leader, but not the braid. And that braid still holds up great. It doesn't break off. I don't need to worry about it. That's one of the benefits of it. If you're an angler like myself that loves and lives and dies by fishing a jig, especially in rocks, braid is your biggest enemy because it's the worst when it comes to abrasion resistance. And I know a lot of people disagree with that, but I promise you, the research is out there. It's terrible. It's great because of that near zero stretch. It's highly sensitive, but as soon as you get that down in rocks, you're gonna break it off often. That's where having a braid to fluorocarbon leader or braid to monofilament leader really comes in hand. With a short leader, if you're getting it up against any hard structure, rocks, zebra mussels, for those that fish around Lake Champlain, out towards the St. Lawrence River, that stuff will chew that up. But with that short fluorocarbon or monofilament leader, you get the benefit of the zero stretch, added sensitivity on the braid, without breaking it off all the time, getting across that ugly stuff. Which brings us last but not least to fluorocarbon. Biggest thing about this, it does have low stretch. It's got decent line memory. If you're gonna spool up some heavier line weight, 15 pound or heavier, and leave it on there for a full season, by about month 3 or 4, you're gonna start to notice the line memory gets pretty ugly. Not an issue if you're running it a little bit lighter, and especially if you're going through it fast. For me, again, I live and die by a jig. I'll re-spool my jig rod 2 or 3 times a season, just because I use it so often. I'm constantly retying just out of an abundance of caution. So I don't really have line memory issues. It does sink, so you have to bear that in mind with some lure applications, such as if you're trying to work a suspending jerkbait. There are different times of the year water temperature will impact buoyancy of not just your line, but also your bait. So while your line may have been great for working a jerkbait in the middle of the summer, you come into the winter, you're gonna notice it's tanking. It's bringing it right down to the bottom and pretty fast, because it has a tendency to sink, so keep that in mind. However, I've already said it, I'll say it again. Fluorocarbon has the best abrasion resistance. How does that all line up? If you're trying to pair this with a rod and a reel, what you want to do. My best bang for my buck, I'm going straight fluorocarbon. It's a happy medium between overall performance and cost. Monofilament's cheap, but it's got high stretch, so it eliminates, for me, several techniques. I can't get away with it. The memory is insane. I don't like dealing with it. Braid, it's great, but in clear water applications, there's been enough days where it has absolutely mattered with line visibility. So I don't want to go straight braid because the fish are going to see it. That's not always the case, but it is often enough that I can't go straight braid. Fluorocarbon is best bang for the buck. If you wanted one line weight, which I didn't put up on here, but I'll cover it, that will cover your bases across, a ton of applications. 12 pound. If you had to pick one line, I'm going to say 12 pound straight fluorocarbon. It's going to be a little light if you're throwing like bigger swim jigs, spinner baits, things like that. Almost everything else, it's going to work. A really good spool of fluorocarbon, Defiant heavy cover, will cover almost all of this. If you want to go up towards, say, a 14 or even a 15.5 pound, that will truly cover everything that you do. But now if you come back down to some of those lighter applications, then you might start to limit some of the capability, or at least the way that technique is being presented. But for the most part, anywhere 12 to say 15.5 pounds, cover anything you could possibly want to do outside of some really, really heavy things and really light finesse techniques. If you're trying to cover that entire spectrum, I hate to break it to you, you're buying 2 rods today. Anything else? Round of applause. Thank you, everyone.